The man at the end of the produce aisle is holding a coupon. He's wearing a gray New Balance sneaker with a small scuff on the left toe. His jacket is a Carhartt from maybe 2009. He's comparing two bags of rice, store brand versus name brand, and he puts the store brand in the cart without hesitation. He drives a 2011 Ford F-150. With a cracked side mirror he fixed himself with electrical tape. His house has been in the family since 1971. Same carpet in the hallway, same kitchen cabinets his father installed. His name is Harold. Harold is 74 years old. Harold's net worth is $613 million. Not his company's valuation. Not a real estate portfolio held in 17 LLCs. Not pre-tax, pre-debt, pre-everything. His personal, liquid, compounding, sitting in accounts net worth is $613 million. The cashier who rings him up has no idea. The neighbor who borrowed his ladder last spring has no idea. His own accountant, who has managed his taxes for 11 years, says Harold is the most unremarkable wealthy person he has ever met in his life. And he means that as the highest compliment he knows how to give. Nobody sees it coming with Harold, because Harold never gave them anything to see. He built $600 million the way most people build nothing. Quietly, incrementally, without an audience, without an announcement, without a single decision that looked from the outside like anything other than a boring Tuesday. And that is exactly the point. My name is Randy. I've spent years studying the gap between people who perform wealth and people who build it. And Harold is the clearest example I've ever found of what the finish line actually looks like. Here's the problem with everything you've been taught about what wealthy people look like. You were taught to read wealth through surfaces. The car, the house, the watch, the restaurant, the vacation photo. You scan these signals the way your brain was trained to, automatically, constantly, confidently. You see the leased Mercedes and you think, doing well. You see the Carhartt jacket and the store brand rice, and you think, getting by. You are reading a language that was designed to mislead you. A 2023 Ramsey Solutions study of over 10,000 American millionaires found that the majority drove used cars, lived in modest homes, and had never once made a financial decision primarily to impress another person. These are not people who sacrificed pleasure for discipline. These are people who simply stopped spending money on signals and redirected every free dollar into assets that compound in silence. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve reports that the median retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64 is $134,000. Not $1.3 million. $134,000. For people who are 1 decade from the end of their working lives. The gap between those two realities, $134,000 and $613 million, is not luck. It is not inheritance. It is not a secret. It is a philosophy, practiced daily, for decades, in complete obscurity. Harold didn't start with $600 million. He started with $11,400 in a savings account, a $34,000 salary, and a single decision he made at 27 years old that he has never once reversed. Let me show you exactly what he did. In 1977, Harold was 27 years old, making $34,000 a year, working in industrial equipment supply. His company gave him a $4,000 raise. His colleagues celebrated theirs. A few upgraded apartments. One bought a boat. It was that kind of year. Harold opened a brokerage account and put the entire raise, every dollar of the increase, into an S&P 500 index fund. He kept living on $34,000. Now here is where most people nod and think, okay, $4,000 invested? Smart move. Small but smart. Here's what nobody tells you about that $4,000. At 10% average annual return, the S&P 500's historical average over the last 50 years, that $4,000 invested in 1977 becomes approximately $280,000 by 2024. Not because Harold is a genius, because Harold left it alone for 47 years and let the compounding do what compounding does when you don't interrupt it. That was one raise, 1 year, one decision. Harold got a raise nearly every year for the next 35 years of his working life, and every single time, he did the same thing. He kept living on the previous year's income and invested the difference. Not half. Not most of it. All of it. The lifestyle never inflated. The accounts did. By the time Harold was 45, his invested assets had crossed $2 million. He was still driving a used truck, still shopping with coupons. His coworkers assumed he was careful with money because he didn't have much of it. They had no framework for the alternative explanation. Let me show you what this cost the people around him. Harold had a colleague. I'll call him Dennis. Same company, same tenure, similar salary trajectory. Dennis bought a house in 1981 for $142,000. Good house, respectable neighborhood. He refinanced it in 1994 to fund a kitchen renovation. Refinanced again in 2003 to help his son with college. Took a home equity line in 2011 for a new roof and a truck. Dennis's house never stopped costing him money. It was always giving something back to the bank. Harold bought his house in 1979 for $68,000. Paid it off in 1991. Never touched the equity. Never refinanced. The house became, in Harold's framework, simply a place he lived. Not a financial instrument. Not a piggy bank. Not a performance of success for the street. Here is what that difference produced. Dennis retired at 67 with $410,000 in a 401k, a house with $180,000 in equity, and a monthly budget that required him to be careful. He is fine. He is comfortable. He is not free. Harold at the same age had accounts that had already crossed $400 million, a number that by that point was compounding faster than he could spend if he tried. The house didn't make the difference. The relationship to the house made the difference. Dennis treated his home equity as a resource to be spent. Harold treated his brokerage account as a resource to be left alone. Two philosophies. 40 years. An unfathomable gap. There is a version of financial success that requires an audience. The car exists to be noticed. The house exists to signal arrival. The watch exists to communicate something to people in the room. And this version of success is not cheap, not just financially, but structurally. When your wealth requires performance, you are constantly feeding the performance instead of the account. Harold made a decision so early and so quietly that he almost can't remember making it. He decided that money was private, not secret in a shameful way. Private in the way a garden is private. It grows whether or not anyone is watching, and it grows better when you stop pulling it up to show people the roots. A 2022 Pew Research study found that 39% of Americans spend money they don't have specifically to keep up with their social circle. Nearly 4 in 10 people actively funding a performance they cannot afford for an audience that is probably doing the same thing. Harold spent $0 on that performance. Not because he was antisocial or indifferent to people's opinions, but because in his framework, every dollar spent on the performance was a dollar that would never compound. And he had done the math early enough to understand what that meant over 40 years. At 8% annual return, every $10,000 not spent on status in your 30s becomes approximately $100,000 by your 60s. Harold did not buy the boat in 1977. He did not renovate the kitchen in 1994. He did not lease the Mercedes in 2004 when his accounts crossed $50 million. And he technically could have bought the dealership. He bought store-brand rice and left the compounding alone. And the compounding, patient, invisible, indifferent to whether anyone was watching, kept doing what it does. When Harold's accountant first calculated that his net worth had crossed $100 million, Harold was 63 years old. Harold looked at the number for a moment and said, "Okay." Then he asked if there was anything he needed to change about his filing. There wasn't. He went home, made dinner, watched the news. His daughter asked him once, she was in her 30s, already knowing pieces of the story by then, what it felt like to have that much money. Harold thought about it for a while. He said it felt like nothing had changed, and then he said, "That's exactly what I was going for." Because Harold never needed the number to be large, he needed the number to be enough. Enough that no emergency could shake him. Enough that his children would be okay. enough that he could write a check for anything that mattered without checking the balance first. He reached enough sometime around his late 40s. Everything after that was just the compounding continuing to do what compounding does when you leave it alone long enough. He didn't engineer $600 million. He engineered freedom at 48, and the remaining 26 years of market returns turned freedom into a figure that required a comma in a new place. The Dalbar Institute's 30-year study found that the average equity investor earns roughly 6% annually, while the market returns closer to 10%. Because most investors react to fear, chase returns, and interrupt compounding at precisely the wrong moments. Harold's singular advantage over 5 decades was that he never did any of those things. He bought, he held, he ignored the headlines, he let the years work. That's it. Not intelligence, not access, not luck. Time and the discipline to leave it alone. Harold is back in the produce aisle. He found a better deal on the rice. He put it in the cart. He's moving toward the checkout now. The cracked mirror on the F-50 waiting in the parking lot. The house with the 1971 carpet waiting on the other side of town. Nobody in that store knows what's in his accounts. Nobody ever has. And Harold, if you asked him whether that bothers him, would look at you with mild, genuine confusion. Because the account was never for them, it was never a performance. It was a garden, planted quietly, watered consistently, left alone to grow in the dark for 50 years, while the rest of the world argued about what wealth was supposed to look like. Performing wealth and building wealth are not the same activity. They have almost never been the same activity. The person performing it spends the asset, the person building it becomes the asset. And after enough decades, the gap between those two approaches stops being a financial statistic and starts being the difference between a man who needs to be careful and a man who can simply write the check. You don't need Harold's number. You need Harold's philosophy. And the philosophy is available right now, today. Regardless of your income, your age, your starting point. Stop spending on the signal. Start feeding the silence. If this is the kind of thinking you want more of, before it costs you years instead of minutes, subscribe. That's the whole ask. Come back when the next one drops. The compound interest doesn't care if anyone's watching. Neither should you.